Scotland, a land of rugged mountains, mist-shrouded highlands, and rivers that cut through glens older than any written record. Long before the Romans ever set foot on its soil, this land was alive with human activity. Mesolithic hunter-gatherers roamed its coasts and forests, leaving behind traces of stone tools and temporary shelters. By the Neolithic era, around 4000 BCE, farming communities had transformed parts of Scotland, constructing enduring monuments like the Callanish stones on the Isle of Lewis and the elaborate settlement of Skara in Orkney. Bronze and Iron Age societies built hill forts and brocks, their circular stone towers dotting the landscape, each a silent testament to the ingenuity and resilience of Scotland's earliest inhabitants. These people, though remarkable, left no written records. Their stories survive only in stone, bone, and oral tradition, echoes of lives long gone. Yet for recorded history of names, battles, and kingdoms, Scotland begins to enter the historical record in 79 CE. That year marked the arrival of the first Roman legions under the command of Gnaeus Julius Agricola, the governor of Britannia. Agricola's campaigns, meticulously documented by his son-in-law, the historian Tacitus, provide the earliest contemporary account of Scotland's people, its terrain, and the tribes who would come to define its northern frontiers. It is here, in the clash between the might of Rome and the fierce independence of the Caledonii and other northern tribes, that Scotland's story in the historical record truly begins. To understand Scotland is to understand its geography, which shaped its people and their history. The country's mountains and valleys, its deep lochs and treacherous rivers, created natural fortresses that would frustrate invaders for centuries. The highlands, often shrouded in mist and snow, were not merely scenic. They were strategic, offering protection to clans and confederations and serving as a proving ground for warriors. Even the Roman legions, disciplined and formidable, found the landscape a constant challenge, forcing them into temporary occupations and defensive fortifications rather than full-scale conquest. The Romans, in their chronicles, described the Caledonii as fierce and independent. Tacitus, ever the eloquent chronicler, emphasized their courage, their skill in guerrilla warfare, and their knowledge of the land, the very traits that would characterize Scottish resistance for centuries to come. At the Battle of Mons Graupius in 83 CE, Agricola claimed a victory over the northern tribes, yet it was a fragile and temporary triumph. Roman forts such as Inchtuffel, Trimontium, and others dotted the landscape, yet these were never permanent settlements. By the early 3rd century, Rome had retreated, leaving the tribes free to shape their destiny. At this moment, the clash between empire and frontier sets the tone for the narrative of Scotland, a story of resistance, adaptation, and identity forged under pressure. Scotland's early recorded history is punctuated not only by conflict, but also by the emergence of distinct cultural and political entities. The tribes of the north, later known collectively as the Picts, left behind enigmatic symbol stones and fortified settlements. In the west, the Gaels of Dalriada, migrating from Ireland, established a network of kingdoms along the western coast and islands. To the south, the Britons of Strathclyde maintained their own kingdoms and fought to preserve autonomy against both northern raiders and southern powers. These early societies were not isolated. They traded, fought, and intermarried, creating the foundations of a diverse and resilient Scottish culture. Even the Vikings, arriving centuries later, would interact with these groups in a mix of raids, settlements, and alliances, further shaping the political landscape. The unification of Scotland would not occur for centuries, yet the seeds of a national identity were planted in these early centuries. Language, law, and kinship networks intertwined across tribal boundaries. Oral traditions preserve the memory of warriors and chieftains, the victories and defeats that would become legends. By the time Kenneth MacAlpin rose to unify the Picts and Gaels around 843 CE, the framework of a kingdom capable of resisting external threats and cultivating its own identity was already in place. That unification did not erase regional identities. Rather, it created a structure within which the story of Scotland, its victories, defeats, and resilience could be told. To view Scotland solely as a land of conflict, however, is to miss its richness. Even in these early centuries, the country's inhabitants engaged in trade, art, and religious practice. The Picts carved intricate designs into stones, not merely as decoration, but as markers of identity, status, and belief. Monastic settlements, which would flourish in later centuries, had their earliest roots in this period, blending Celtic Christianity with local customs. Scotland, from its earliest recorded history, was both a battlefield and a cradle of culture, a land of paradoxes, harsh yet beautiful, fragmented yet united by shared traditions and the memory of resistance. As we move through the centuries, Scotland's story is one of adaptation. Its people faced invaders from Rome, waves of Norsemen, and later pressures from England and continental powers. Each challenge forced innovation in governance, warfare, and diplomacy. By tracing the narrative from Agricola's campaigns in 79 CE to the consolidation of the kingdom under Kenneth MacAlpin and beyond into the medieval period, one sees the gradual emergence of a nation that was neither conquered nor static. Scotland's identity, forged in adversity and preserved through centuries of conflict and cultural exchange, provides the through line for understanding its later history. This documentary will explore the rise of the Scottish Empire not as a tale of conquests alone, but as a story of resilience, ingenuity, and enduring identity. From Roman accounts to medieval kings, from wars of independence to the cultural flowering of the Scottish Enlightenment, and into the modern political landscape, each chapter of Scotland's history reflects the same traits observed by Tacitus nearly 2,000 years ago: courage, defiance, and a relentless connection to the land. Scotland's hills, rivers, and glens may seem eternal, but the story of its people is dynamic, shaped by every battle, treaty, and alliance. To understand Scotland is to understand a people who have repeatedly asserted their independence, nurtured their culture, and preserved their identity against overwhelming odds. And it is within this continuum from the first Roman incursion in 79 CE to the present day that the history of the Scottish Empire unfolds, a tale of endurance, adaptation, and unyielding spirit. The story of recorded Scottish history truly begins in 79 CE, when the first Roman legions ventured into the northern reaches of Britain, a region the empire knew as Caledonia. The governor of Roman Britain at the time, Gnaeus Julius Agricola, was tasked with expanding Rome's influence beyond the more hospitable lands of southern and central Britain. Tacitus, Agricola's son-in-law and historian, would later document these campaigns in his work Agricola, offering not only a military chronicle but a vivid account of the land, its people, and the formidable challenges Rome faced in subduing it. Agricola's northern campaigns were not merely exercises in military conquest. They were encounters with a land that seemed designed to resist control. Caledonia's dense forests, steep hills, and fast-flowing rivers provided a natural defense for the indigenous tribes. These people, collectively described by the Romans as Caledonii, were far from a monolithic society. Tacitus details a multitude of tribes, each fiercely independent, adept at guerrilla tactics, and intimately familiar with their harsh environment. They were not barbarians in the simplistic Roman sense, but a complex mosaic of cultures, communities, and political structures, each defending its territory with tenacity that would confound even Rome's most disciplined soldiers. The culmination of Agricola's campaigns came in 83 CE at the Battle of Mons. Graupius, fought somewhere in the northeastern highlands, though the exact location remains debated by historians. Tacitus presents this battle as a decisive Roman victory, yet the reality was far more nuanced. The Romans deployed disciplined infantry formations and cavalry maneuvers to engage the northern tribes, whose warriors fought with spears, swords, and an intimate knowledge of the terrain. While Rome claimed victory, the battle did not result in long-term occupation. The tribes, though suffering losses, retreated into the mountains and continued to resist imperial authority. Mons Graupius thus symbolizes both the prowess of the Roman military machine and the resilience of the Caledonian tribes, a theme that would recur throughout Scottish history. Roman occupation in Scotland never achieved the permanence seen in southern Britain. Instead, Rome established a series of forts, watchtowers, and temporary marching camps to secure strategic positions, monitor movement, and protect supply lines. Forts such as Inch-Tuthil, overlooking the Tay Valley, served as major legionary bases capable of housing thousands of soldiers. Trimontium, near modern-day Melrose, controlled access along the Tweed Valley, while smaller forts and signal towers provided early warning and communication across the landscape. Roads were built to link these positions, though they were fewer and more rudimentary than in southern Britain. These installations illustrate Rome's strategy, not to settle or colonize fully, but to project power, extract resources, and contain the rebellious tribes. Tacitus offers insight into the social and cultural life of the Caledonii. He describes their courage in battle, the fierce loyalty of warriors to their clans, and their deeply rooted sense of honor. Women, he notes, played significant roles in both domestic and martial spheres, inspiring men in battle and maintaining tribal cohesion. The Caledonian tribes were also highly mobile, able to disappear into the forests and highlands to evade Roman pursuit, then re-emerge to harass supply lines and isolated detachments. Their tactics were adaptive, irregular, and designed to exploit the weaknesses of a conventional, heavily armored army, a strategy that foreshadows centuries of Scottish resistance to external powers. By the early 3rd century, Rome had largely abandoned its attempts to control Caledonia. The reasons were multifaceted. Agricola's successors faced increasing pressure in other provinces, financial strain, and logistical difficulties in maintaining supply lines across hostile terrain. Moreover, the Roman military model, reliant on permanent infrastructure and disciplined formations, was ill-suited to the guerrilla tactics employed by the tribes. Instead, Rome consolidated its northern frontier along the Antonine Wall, built c. 142 CE, and later retreated to the Hadrianus Wall, completed 122 CE, in the south, leaving northern Scotland outside direct imperial control. The forts and roads remained, but the tribes regained autonomy, maintaining their independence and culture. The Roman period in Scotland was not only defined by conflict, it also facilitated cultural exchanges, trade, and technological diffusion. The Romans introduced metalworking techniques, pottery styles, and coinage, and their presence created new opportunities for local elites to gain status and wealth through alliance or trade. Evidence of Roman artifacts from brooches to imported amphorae suggests that some Caledonian communities engaged with the empire on their own terms, selectively adopting Roman practices while preserving indigenous traditions. This interaction laid the groundwork for a complex society that blended native resilience with selective external influence. The Roman campaigns also left an enduring legacy in how Scotland perceived power and resistance. The Caledonian tribes' ability to withstand the might of Rome became a foundational narrative in the collective memory of later generations. Tacitus himself marvels at their tenacity, implicitly acknowledging that Rome had met its match in a land where nature itself conspired against conquest. This memory of resistance would echo in later centuries during Viking invasions, conflicts with England, and the wars of Scottish independence, creating a cultural lineage of defiance that remains central to Scottish identity. Moreover, the Roman incursion into Scotland highlights the strategic importance of the region. Though not permanently subdued, the northern territories provided a buffer for Roman Britain and served as a cautionary tale about overextension. The empire's experience in Caledonia demonstrates the limits of military power and the enduring influence of geography, culture, and social cohesion in shaping historical outcomes. For the Romans, Scotland was a frontier of both ambition and frustration. For the Caledonian tribes, it was the first stage upon which they asserted autonomy and identity, a stage that would expand dramatically in the centuries to come. By 210 CE, the Romans had fully withdrawn from northern Scotland, leaving behind forts, roads, and a fractured yet resilient tribal landscape. The Caledonii, along with other northern tribes, returned to self-governance, retaining cultural practices and political structures that would evolve into the Pictish confederacies. The Gaels of Dalriada, meanwhile, began consolidating in the west, and the southern Britons of Strathclyde maintained their kingdoms. These developments set the stage for the political, cultural, and military evolution that would eventually culminate in the unification of Scotland under Kenneth MacAlpin in the 9th century. In this way, Roman Scotland is both a story of imperial ambition and local resilience. It is a story of legions and tribes, forts and forests, victories claimed but never fully secured. Agricola's campaigns, the Battle of Mons Graupius, and the subsequent Roman presence created a framework of historical memory, trade, and cultural exchange, but they also highlighted the limits of conquest. For Scotland, the period from 79 to 210 CE was a formative one, establishing the enduring traits of defiance, strategic cunning, and adaptation that would define its people and their history for centuries. The legacy of Roman Scotland is thus twofold. It is a chronicle of conflict, ambition, and tactical innovation, and it is the first recorded chapter in the story of a land that would repeatedly resist external domination, develop distinct cultural and political identities, and ultimately rise as a kingdom capable of shaping its own destiny. This is the foundation upon which all subsequent Scottish history is built, from the Picts and Gaels to the medieval kings and the struggles that would define the nation for millennia. When the Roman legions retreated from northern Britain by the early 3rd century CE, Caledonia, the land beyond the Antonine and Hadrian walls, returned to self-rule free from imperial control, yet facing a new era of fragmentation and internal development. The withdrawal of Rome left behind roads, forts, and other infrastructure, remnants of an empire that had briefly imposed its authority but could not conquer the resilient tribes of the north. In these centuries, Scotland's history became less a record of imperial chronicles and more a story of tribal kingdoms, cultural synthesis, and the slow emergence of a distinct political identity. The Picts emerged as the dominant force in northern and eastern Scotland. Their origins remain partially obscured, but archaeological evidence, notably symbol stones, hill forts, and sophisticated settlements, indicates a society organized into powerful tribal confederacies. The Picts were skilled warriors and artisans, with a culture heavily influenced by earlier Iron Age traditions. Their enigmatic symbols, carved on standing stones, may have represented lineage, territorial claims, or religious beliefs. These early Pictish communities were united not under a centralized monarchy, but through networks of kinship and allegiances among regional chieftains, a decentralized power structure that would persist for centuries. In the West, the Gaels of Dalriada, migrants from Ireland, established a series of coastal kingdoms and island settlements along the western seaboard and the Hebrides. They brought with them the Gaelic language, culture, and maritime expertise, creating a political and cultural bridge between Ireland and Scotland. Dalriada was organized around clan-based structures, with kingship often determined by complex familial hierarchies. The Gaels excelled in naval warfare and raiding, their longships enabling them to navigate both inland rivers and open seas, giving them influence far beyond their modest territorial holdings. Trade, cultural exchange, and occasional conflict with Pictish neighbors defined much of the western landscape during this period. To the south, the Britons of Strathclyde maintained continuity with the post-Roman Romano-British culture. Strathclyde's kingdom encompassed the Clyde Valley, stretching from modern Glasgow westward into Cumbria, and its rulers sought to preserve Roman administrative and military traditions even as the empire faded. The region was both a buffer against northern incursions and a participant in the broader power dynamics of Britain. Over time, Strathclyde's kings engaged in alliances, marriages, and occasional conflicts with Picts, Gaels, and later Vikings, creating a network of interwoven political relationships across the land. From the late 8th century, the arrival of the Vikings introduced a new and transformative element. Scandinavian raiders, driven by ambition, opportunity, and maritime prowess, began targeting Scotland's coasts, islands, and rivers. Orkney, Shetland, and the Hebrides became hubs of Norse settlement, reshaping the demographic and political landscape. The Vikings were not simply destroyers. They were also traders, settlers, and cultural transmitters. Their presence catalyzed new alliances among Scottish kingdoms, forcing defense cooperation and occasionally fostering hybrid communities where Norse and native traditions coexisted. The Scandinavian impact was long-lasting, influencing place names, maritime practices, and the political strategies of Scottish rulers. Throughout this period, Scotland's kingdoms were in a constant state of dynamic flux. Power shifted between northern, western, and southern polities, with chieftains and kings rising and falling in response to both internal ambition and external pressure. The Picts, despite their warrior culture, were periodically divided by internal rivalries. Dalriada faced pressures from Norse raiders, while Strathclyde had to defend against incursions from both north and south. Yet this fragmentation did not signify weakness. Instead, it created a culture of resilience, adaptability, and political negotiation that would later facilitate the unification of Scotland. Religion and culture also played crucial roles during this era. Celtic Christianity, introduced via Ireland and Pictish missionary efforts, began to take root in monasteries and communities across the north and west. These religious centers were more than spiritual hubs. They were centers of learning, literacy, and cultural preservation, safeguarding oral traditions and codifying legal and moral codes. Monks and scholars chronicled events, produced illuminated manuscripts, and maintained connections across the British Isles, providing the intellectual foundation for later unification efforts. Pictish and Gaelic art, law, and ritual practices merged in ways that created a uniquely Scottish cultural identity, even in the absence of a centralized state. Trade and economic networks expanded during this period as well. Scotland's coastal communities and river valleys facilitated the movement of goods such as wool, hides, metalwork, and agricultural products. Interaction with Irish kingdoms, Norse settlers, and even occasional southern Britons provided access to foreign goods and ideas. The economy remained largely agrarian, with subsistence farming supplemented by animal husbandry, fishing, and small-scale craft production. However, these early economic activities laid the groundwork for more complex systems that would emerge in the medieval period, including burghs, markets, and regulated trade. Military innovation was another defining feature of these centuries. The Picts' use of hill forts, hidden passes, and mobile warbands, combined with the maritime skills of the Gaels and the Viking longships, meant that conflict was a constant presence but never uniform. Battles were often opportunistic, shaped by terrain and the element of surprise. Leadership was based as much on charisma, lineage, and tactical acumen as on sheer numbers. These patterns of warfare, emphasizing flexibility and local knowledge, would characterize Scottish military culture for centuries, from resistance to Viking raids to the wars of independence against England. By the early 9th century, the political landscape of Scotland was approaching a tipping point. The pressures of Viking incursions, internal rivalries, and the need for coordinated defense created conditions for unification. The Pictish kingdoms, weakened by internal divisions and external threats, faced the rising power of the Gaels of Dalriada. Meanwhile, southern Britons and Strathclyde maintained relative independence but participated in a broader network of alliances. This interwoven map of kingdoms, tribes, and raiders set the stage for the emergence of a more centralized Scottish monarchy under Kenneth MacAlpin around 843 CE, which would formally unite the Picts and Gaels and lay the foundation for a coherent Scottish identity. In summary, the centuries following Rome's withdrawal were formative in shaping the Scottish identity. The Picts, Gaels, and Britons cultivated resilience, political sophistication, and cultural depth in the absence of imperial oversight. Viking incursions acted as both a threat and a catalyst, forcing adaptation and unification. Religion, art, and trade flourished alongside conflict, creating a rich tapestry of social and cultural life. These developments, often fragmented and localized, established the essential characteristics that would define Scotland: a sense of independence, a capacity for political negotiation, and a persistent identity rooted in land, kinship, and shared history. It is in this crucible of post-Roman Scotland, land of tribal confederacies, maritime kingdoms, and resilient Highlanders, that the story of the Scottish Empire begins to take shape. The lessons of these centuries of resistance against overwhelming odds, the fusion of cultures, and the persistent drive toward unity would resonate throughout Scotland's history, guiding the rise of the kingdom that would eventually claim its place in the medieval world. By the early 9th century, Scotland was a land of contrasts and converging pressures. The Pictish kingdoms in the northeast, once dominant and formidable, were weakened by internal rivalries and succession disputes. In the west, the Gaels of Dalriada had consolidated their maritime territories, linking islands and coastal settlements through kinship and naval strength. Meanwhile, Viking incursions, relentless and increasingly organized, threatened both the Picts and Gaels, destabilizing traditional power structures and forcing the disparate kingdoms to reconsider their options. It was in this environment of uncertainty and opportunity that Kenneth MacAlpin emerged as a figure shrouded in both history and legend, whose actions would lay the foundation for what would become the Kingdom of Scotland. Kenneth MacAlpin, traditionally thought to have ascended to power around 843 CE, is often portrayed as the first king to unite the Picts and Gaels. Modern scholarship debates the exact circumstances of his rise, questioning whether it was achieved through outright conquest, dynastic inheritance, or a combination of strategic marriage and political maneuvering. What remains clear is that MacAlpin's leadership marks a turning point, a unification of northern and western polities under a single monarchy, creating the nucleus of a kingdom capable of coordinated defense, governance, and identity formation. The Pictish influence in this unification cannot be understated. The Picts had long established a tradition of fortified settlements, intricate symbol stones, and tribal alliances. They were formidable in both warfare and cultural sophistication. The Gaels of Dalriada, by contrast, brought a flexible kin-based political system, maritime mobility, and extensive connections to Ireland. By uniting these two traditions, the Pictish emphasis on territorial control and the Gaelic emphasis on kinship and naval power, MacAlpin created a hybrid structure that would define early Scottish kingship. This integration allowed for more coherent military responses to Viking raids, coordinated diplomacy with neighboring kingdoms, and centralized collection of tribute and taxes, however rudimentary these systems may have initially been. Viking activity played a decisive role in shaping MacAlpin's political landscape. Scandinavian raiders had increasingly targeted monasteries, coastal settlements, and navigable rivers, seizing wealth and destabilizing existing power structures. Monasteries like Iona, founded by Street Columba in the 6th century, were repeatedly attacked, underscoring the vulnerability of isolated but culturally significant centers. The need to defend against such raids encouraged alliances between Pictish and Gaelic leaders, fostering cooperation that may have smoothed the path for MacAlpin's unification efforts. In this sense, the Viking threat inadvertently accelerated the consolidation of power under a centralized Scottish monarchy. Cultural synthesis accompanied political unification. Gaelic language, legal practices, and customs increasingly influenced former Pictish territories, while Pictish traditions persisted in art, fortification, and local governance. The distinctive Pictish symbol stones continued to be erected for centuries, serving both as commemorations of lineage and as markers of authority under the new king. Ecclesiastical influence also played a significant role, as monasteries and religious networks facilitated communication, preserved literacy, and reinforced the legitimacy of MacAlpin's rule. Christianity, already entrenched in both Pictish and Gaelic territories, provided a shared ideological framework that helped bridge tribal and cultural divides. Military considerations were central to MacAlpin's success. The newly unified kingdom required a coherent defensive strategy to repel both internal rivalries and external threats. The highlands, long a natural barrier to invaders, became a defensive backbone, while strategic river valleys and coastal sites allowed for early warning and mobilization. MacAlpin's forces combined Pictish knowledge of the land with Gaelic naval mobility, creating a flexible military system capable of responding to Viking raids and regional conflicts. This combination of terrain expertise, mobility, and centralized leadership set a precedent for Scottish military organization in the centuries to come. The symbolism of MacAlpin's unification is also notable. Legend tells of the MacAlpin's treason, a tale in which he allegedly invited Pictish nobles to a feast and then orchestrated their elimination, securing his control over the Pictish kingdom. While this story is likely apocryphal, it reflects the enduring perception of MacAlpin as a decisive, strategic, and sometimes ruthless ruler, qualities necessary for leadership in a fragmented and contested landscape. Even if the details are embellished, the legend underscores the historical reality that unification required both diplomacy and strength, balancing coercion and consensus to forge a sustainable monarchy. Economically and socially, the kingdom under MacAlpin's rule remained primarily agrarian, with small settlements, cattle-based wealth, and subsistence farming forming the backbone of life. However, unification allowed for more systematic tribute collection, resource coordination, and the establishment of early political centers. Trade with Ireland, the British Isles, and even Viking settlements facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and technology, while the monarchy's authority gradually extended to oversee and regulate these interactions. Over time, these developments laid the groundwork for more sophisticated governance and economic structures in medieval Scotland. Religious and intellectual life continued to flourish under the new political framework. Monasteries like Iona remained vital centers of learning, producing manuscripts, maintaining ecclesiastical networks, and legitimizing kingship through spiritual endorsement. Missionary activity extended into newly unified territories, fostering cultural cohesion and reinforcing the ideological foundations of kingship. In this sense, the unification of Picts and Gaels was not merely political, but also cultural and spiritual, establishing a shared framework of governance, belief, and identity. By the mid-9th century, the kingdom under Kenneth MacAlpin represented the first recognizable iteration of Scotland as a unified polity. It was still fragile, composed of disparate regions with distinct traditions, yet it was a political entity capable of coordinated defense, administration, and diplomacy. The Picts would gradually merge culturally with the Gaels, contributing art, law, and military expertise to the emerging Scottish identity. The Gaels' linguistic and maritime traditions became dominant, yet they were enriched by Pictish precedents in symbolism, fortification, and local governance. The birth of Scotland under Kenneth MacAlpin thus exemplifies the convergence of circumstance, leadership, and adaptation. A weakened Pictish confederacy, an ascendant Gaelic polity, and the pressing threat of Viking raiders created conditions for unification that may not have occurred otherwise. The legacy of MacAlpin's reign extends beyond the historical record. It established a model of monarchy that would endure, introduced political and military strategies suited to the Scottish landscape, and began the process of forging a national identity from the complex mosaic of tribal, cultural, and religious traditions. In essence, Kenneth MacAlpin's unification of the Picts and Gaels is the turning point at which the story of Scotland shifts from fragmented tribal societies to a kingdom capable of shaping its own destiny. The Highlands, the western seaboard, and the eastern plains were no longer separate theaters of conflict and culture. They were components of a larger political, military, and cultural framework that would evolve over centuries into the medieval Scottish kingdom. This was the dawn of a nation, a kingdom born not solely of conquest, but of necessity, diplomacy, and resilience, laying the foundation for all subsequent chapters in Scottish history. Following the unification of Picts and Gaels under Kenneth MacAlpin in the mid-9th century, Scotland entered a period of gradual consolidation and state formation. The kingdom was still young, its authority fragmented across mountains, valleys, and islands, and its rulers faced continuous threats from Norse raiders, ambitious neighbors, and internal rivalries. Yet over the next 4 centuries, successive Scottish monarchs established the foundations of a kingdom capable of defending itself, governing its people, and projecting power beyond its rugged borders. One of the early consolidators of power was Constantine II, r. 900 to 943, a grandson of Kenneth MacAlpin. Constantine's reign was defined by diplomacy as much as warfare. He navigated relations with neighboring Northumbria and England, paying homage to the balance of power while ensuring the autonomy of his own kingdom. Constantine faced repeated Viking incursions, which remained a defining threat throughout this era. Rather than relying solely on open-field battles, Scottish kings employed a combination of fortification, strategic retreats, and guerrilla-style engagements, leveraging the difficult terrain to offset Viking numerical and technological superiority. These strategies reinforced the kingdom's survival while gradually centralizing authority. The 10th and 11th centuries saw Scotland's royal authority become increasingly structured. Malcolm II, r. 1005 to 1034, one of the most influential kings of the era, sought to consolidate smaller regional lordships into a more cohesive monarchy. He extended royal influence into areas traditionally controlled by powerful clans and lesser kings, asserting central authority over the northern and southern frontiers. Malcolm II's reign was marked by calculated military campaigns against both Viking settlers and neighboring kingdoms, securing territory and strengthening the monarchy's legitimacy. Importantly, his reign established a precedent for dynastic succession that, though not always smooth, provided continuity and stability for the realm. Alongside military and political consolidation, cultural and religious development became central to Scotland's identity. Kings such as David I, r. 1124 to 1153, actively promoted the establishment of abbeys, monasteries, and episcopal structures, aligning the kingdom with broader European Christendom. David introduced continental administrative practices and feudal systems, bringing Scotland into closer contact with France, England, and the Holy Roman Empire. His establishment of burghs, urban centers like Edinburgh, Stirling, and Perth, facilitated trade, strengthened royal revenue, and encouraged cultural exchange. These initiatives not only enhanced royal authority, but also fostered economic development, creating hubs that would persist as centers of Scottish civic and economic life. Borderlands remained a constant concern. Scotland shared long frontiers with Norway in the north and England in the south. Northern territories, including the Hebrides, Orkney, and Shetland, were under intermittent Norse control, resulting in both conflict and cultural exchange. Diplomacy with Norway was crucial, often involving marriage alliances, tribute payments, and negotiated boundaries. In the south, Anglo-Scottish relations oscillated between alliance and hostility. The Scottish kings maintained sovereignty through a combination of treaties, strategic marriages, and periodic military campaigns, setting the stage for centuries of border tension that would define Scottish political life. Legal systems also advanced during this period, with the consolidation of customary law under royal oversight. Kings presided over disputes, codified regional customs, and sought to standardize justice across their realm. Monastic scribes and clerks preserved these records, producing some of the earliest written evidence of Scottish governance. Ecclesiastical institutions, increasingly aligned with Rome, played a dual role: spiritual authority and administrative function, reinforcing royal power while integrating the kingdom into the wider European framework. These legal and administrative developments helped transform Scotland from a patchwork of kin-based territories into a more cohesive state capable of enduring both internal and external pressures. Military organization evolved alongside governance. Scottish kings relied on a combination of noble levies, clan warriors, and fortified positions to secure the kingdom. Castles and defensive structures began to appear more prominently in strategic locations, particularly along vulnerable coasts and river valleys. Scottish warfare emphasized mobility, knowledge of the terrain, and tactical flexibility traits inherited from centuries of resistance against Vikings and Romans alike. These adaptations allowed Scotland to repel incursions, maintain independence, and exert influence over contested regions, solidifying the monarchy's control over its realm. Cultural identity was simultaneously reinforced. Scotland's unique blend of Pictish, Gaelic, and later Norse influences created a rich tapestry of art, language, and tradition. Kings patronized religion, literature, and architecture, commissioning stone crosses, illuminated manuscripts, and ecclesiastical buildings that communicated both piety and power. Festivals, legal ceremonies, and military pageantry all served to legitimize authority and cultivate a shared sense of Scottish identity among a diverse population. This cultural cohesion was critical in a landscape where geography often separated communities by miles of mountains and rivers. The 12th and 13th centuries further expanded the kingdom's reach. Alexander II, r. 1214 to 1249, and Alexander III, r. 1249 to 1286, strengthened central authority, extended influence into the Western Isles, and promoted economic development through burghs and trade. Alexander III's reign, in particular, is remembered as a period of relative stability and prosperity, during which Scotland's borders were largely secure and royal authority firmly established. Yet even in this era of consolidation, challenges persisted. Viking and Norse influence remained in the north, and relations with England were often tense, requiring a delicate balance of diplomacy, tribute, and occasional military action. This period of medieval consolidation was not only about kings and battles, it was also about laying the foundations of national identity. By centralizing authority, codifying law, and promoting cultural and religious cohesion, Scotland transitioned from a collection of fragmented tribal territories into a kingdom capable of unified action. Trade networks expanded, burghs developed as centers of economic and social life, and ecclesiastical institutions provided continuity, literacy, and cultural integration. The legacy of these centuries is a Scotland that could not only defend itself, but also articulate its identity as a kingdom aware of its autonomy, capable of governance, and poised to assert itself in the conflicts and transformations of the later Middle Ages. In essence, the medieval kings of Scotland, from Constantine II to Alexander III, built the political, military, cultural, and economic foundations upon which the nation would survive invasions, dynastic crises, and eventual wars of independence. Their efforts ensured that Scotland remained more than a collection of clans and local kingdoms. It became a polity with enduring institutions, capable of adapting to challenges while preserving its distinct character. By the 13th century, the Scottish kingdom had matured into a state that could negotiate its place among neighboring powers, project authority within its borders, and nurture a sense of collective identity, an identity that would be tested and defined in the centuries to follow. The late 13th century was a period of crisis and transformation in Scotland. In 1286, the death of Alexander III, King of Scotland, sent shockwaves through the kingdom. His sudden demise, following a fall from his horse during a journey in the highlands, left Scotland without a clear heir. His granddaughter, Margaret, the Maid of Norway, was the closest legitimate successor, but she was a child living across the North Sea, far removed from the Scottish political scene. This succession crisis created a power vacuum that invited intervention from neighboring powers, most prominently Edward I of England, whose ambitions would soon ignite a conflict that would define Scottish identity for centuries. Edward I, already king of a powerful and expanding England, seized upon Scotland's vulnerability. He asserted his authority over the succession dispute, demanding recognition as overlord of Scotland, a claim that many Scottish nobles reluctantly acknowledged under duress. Edward's involvement quickly escalated from legal arbitration to military occupation, with English forces asserting control over key castles and territories. The imposition of English authority was met with widespread resentment, fueling the rise of resistance leaders who would become national icons. Among the earliest and most prominent of these leaders was William Wallace, a minor noble whose personal grievances and patriotic fervor propelled him into the forefront of Scottish resistance. By 1297, Wallace had organized bands of guerrilla fighters, launching raids against English forces and undermining their control. His strategic brilliance was demonstrated at the Battle of Stirling Bridge, where he leveraged the terrain of the narrow crossing over the River Forth to annihilate a superior English force. The victory was both militarily significant and symbolically powerful, galvanizing Scottish morale and proving that the English army, despite its size and resources, could be defeated by well-led local forces exploiting knowledge of the land. Wallace's success was not merely military, it was ideological. He became the embodiment of resistance, a figure around whom disparate Scottish clans and regions could unite. His leadership inspired continued defiance even after the English mounted a counteroffensive. In 1305, however, Wallace was captured, tried for treason, and executed in London in a brutal display intended to crush Scottish resistance. Yet his martyrdom only strengthened the resolve of the Scots, embedding Wallace's legend deeply into the national consciousness and setting the stage for the emergence of a monarch who would secure Scotland's independence. That monarch was Robert the Bruce, who ascended to the Scottish throne in 1306. Bruce, a scion of the House of Bruce and claimant to the crown, combined dynastic ambition with patriotic fervor. He faced immense challenges, rival claimants, English forces occupying significant territories, and the task of consolidating support among fractious Scottish nobles. Bruce's strategy was both patient and ruthless. He focused on securing loyal strongholds, winning the allegiance of key regional leaders, and using targeted military engagements to gradually undermine English authority. His efforts culminated in the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, a decisive confrontation in which Bruce's forces, outnumbered but highly disciplined and strategically positioned, routed the English army and secured Scotland's military independence. The victory at Bannockburn was not merely symbolic, it had profound political implications. It solidified Bruce's legitimacy as king and demonstrated to the Scottish people that self-rule was achievable against one of the most powerful monarchies in Europe. Following this victory, Bruce undertook a systematic campaign to consolidate his control over all Scottish territories, securing castles, enforcing loyalty among nobles, and stabilizing regions previously divided by internal disputes or English occupation. His leadership established a precedent for national unity and centralized authority in a kingdom that had long been fragmented. The culmination of these struggles was the Declaration of Arbroath in 1320, a document of unprecedented historical significance. Sent to Pope John XXI, the declaration asserted Scotland's sovereignty and the legitimacy of Bruce's kingship, framing Scottish independence not as rebellion, but as a moral and political necessity. The text famously emphasized that the king ruled by the consent of the people, and that any monarch who failed to defend Scotland's independence could justifiably be removed, a radical notion for the medieval period. The Declaration of Arbroath is widely recognized as a foundational statement of Scottish national identity, articulating principles of sovereignty, liberty, and collective responsibility that resonate to this day. The Wars of Independence also had lasting social and cultural impacts. The prolonged conflict fostered a sense of collective identity among Scots who had previously been divided by regional loyalties, clan allegiances, and political factions. Shared experience in defending the homeland, coupled with veneration of heroes like Wallace and Bruce, created a narrative of resilience and defiance that would inform Scottish culture for centuries. Chroniclers, poets, and oral traditions preserved these stories, embedding them into the consciousness of successive generations. Economically, the wars were disruptive yet transformative. Prolonged military campaigns, sieges, and English occupation devastated farmland and trade networks. However, the need to sustain armies and fortify territories encouraged innovations in logistics, taxation, and governance. Burghs and towns became centers of resistance and administration, serving both economic and strategic purposes. The conflict accelerated the development of political institutions capable of organizing resources and maintaining cohesion across a fragmented kingdom, institutions that would evolve into enduring frameworks for Scottish governance. Religiously, the Wars of Independence intersected with broader European dynamics. Scottish clergy and monastic institutions often supported national resistance, providing both moral authority and practical assistance. The Declaration of Arbroath, addressed to the papacy, illustrates how the Scottish struggle was framed not merely in secular terms, but within the moral and spiritual discourse of Christendom. This alignment with religious legitimacy enhanced the credibility of Scottish claims and reinforced the integration of faith into national identity. By 1320, with Bruce securely on the throne and the Declaration of Arbroath affirming sovereignty, Scotland emerged from decades of turmoil as an independent kingdom, distinct from England in governance, culture, and identity. The period from Alexander III's death to the resolution under Robert the Bruce demonstrates the intricate interplay of dynastic politics, military strategy, cultural cohesion, and ideological assertion. It reveals a nation forged in adversity, whose leaders and people navigated internal division, external aggression, and existential threats to create a polity capable of enduring for centuries. The Wars of Independence thus represent both a military and ideological revolution. Scotland's struggle was not only for territory, but for self-definition, autonomy, and the right to govern according to its own laws and customs. It was a crucible in which the Scottish identity was solidified, a narrative of resistance, courage, and unity in the face of overwhelming odds. Wallace and Bruce, the nobles and common soldiers, clergy and chroniclers alike, contributed to the creation of a national consciousness that would inform Scotland's political and cultural life for generations. In retrospect, the wars of independence were more than a series of battles. They were the birth pangs of a nation asserting its sovereignty and articulating a vision of governance, identity, and collective responsibility. The lessons of this era, the strategic acumen, the integration of diverse factions, and the assertion of moral and political legitimacy would echo throughout Scottish history, influencing subsequent generations of kings, leaders, and citizens committed to preserving the independence and distinct character of their homeland. In 1371, the death of David II, son of Robert the Bruce, ushered in a new chapter in Scottish history, the ascent of the House of Stuart, later Stuart. Robert II, grandson of Robert the Bruce through his daughter Marjorie Bruce, became king, inaugurating a dynasty that would rule Scotland for more than 2 centuries. The Stuart kings inherited a kingdom strengthened by the wars of independence but faced immense challenges, including political factionalism, external threats from England, and internal disputes over power and succession. The late medieval period under the Stuarts was one of consolidation, conflict, cultural growth, and the intricate navigation of dynastic politics, formative era in Scotland's identity and governance. The early Stuart monarchs, such as Robert III, r. 1390 to 1406, and James I, r. 1406 to 1437, grappled with the inherent instability of Scottish politics. Noble families wielded immense influence, often rivaling the crown itself. Powerful clans and earls controlled vast territories and armies, making central authority difficult to enforce. James I's early life exemplifies this fragility. He was held captive in England for 18 years, a pawn in the complex diplomacy between the Scottish and English crowns. Upon his return in 1424, James I embarked on a campaign to reassert royal authority, curbing the power of rebellious nobles through both negotiation and execution, and promoting law, justice, and administrative reforms. His reign marked a turning point in strengthening the monarchy while balancing the persistent influence of powerful Scottish clans. During the Stuart period, Scotland also faced continual tension with England. Border skirmishes, raids, and military campaigns were recurring features of the late medieval landscape. Kings and nobles alike had to navigate this constant threat while managing internal disputes, making diplomacy and martial prowess equally vital to survival. Treaties and marriages were common strategies to maintain fragile peace, as Scottish monarchs sought to secure legitimacy and alliances without compromising sovereignty. Despite these challenges, the kingdom gradually stabilized, consolidating borders and royal authority, while cultivating a distinct political identity rooted in both tradition and pragmatic governance. Cultural and religious developments flourished alongside these political dynamics. The Scottish Church played a central role, acting as both a spiritual authority and a stabilizing force in governance. Monastic institutions, cathedral schools, and abbeys such as Melrose and Dunfermline became centers of learning, literacy, and artistic production. Latin remained the language of administration and scholarship, but Gaelic and emerging Scots vernaculars reflected the kingdom's diverse cultural heritage. The Stuart monarchs patronized literature, architecture, and the arts, commissioning works that projected royal authority and cultivated a sense of national identity. These cultural achievements reinforced the monarchy's legitimacy and provided continuity amid political turbulence. Perhaps the most dramatic figure of this period was Mary, Queen of Scots, 1542 to 1587. Ascending to the throne as an infant, Mary's reign was marked by intrigue, factionalism, and religious conflict. Her early life was spent in France, where she was married to the Dauphin, linking Scotland to continental politics and Catholic influence. Upon returning to Scotland, Mary faced a kingdom transformed by the Scottish Reformation, 1560, which had established Presbyterianism as the dominant religious framework and significantly curtailed Catholic power. Mary's Catholicism, combined with her claim to the English throne, made her a focal point of domestic and international tension, and her reign was ultimately destabilized by rebellions, noble conspiracies, and political miscalculations. Her forced abdication in 1567 and subsequent execution in 1587 encapsulate the perils of late medieval monarchy, where dynastic ambition, religion, and geopolitics intertwined in deadly ways. The Scottish Reformation itself reshaped the kingdom. By rejecting papal authority and establishing Presbyterian governance, Scotland forged a religious identity distinct from both England and continental Europe. Reformers like John Knox influenced not only church organization but also political philosophy, promoting ideas of covenant, moral accountability, and resistance to tyrannical rule. Religion became inseparable from national identity, influencing legal systems, social norms, and even military alliances. The Reformation also reinforced the monarchy's delicate balance of power, requiring kings and queens to navigate theological divisions while maintaining authority over a diverse and politically active nobility. Economically, Scotland experienced a gradual transformation. Trade expanded, particularly with the Low Countries and continental Europe, while towns and burghs grew in size and sophistication. Scottish merchants exported wool, fish, and other resources, establishing networks that connected the kingdom to broader European markets. Agriculture remained foundational, but urbanization, commerce, and craft production contributed to a more complex economy. The Stuart kings recognized the importance of fostering economic growth to support royal authority, taxation, and military campaigns, laying the groundwork for the later prosperity of the early modern period. Military organization evolved as well. The late medieval period saw the increased use of castles and fortified towns to secure strategic locations and project royal authority. Scottish armies combined traditional Highland warriors with more structured infantry and cavalry units, adapting to both domestic rebellions and external threats. The border regions remained militarized, with wardens appointed to maintain security and enforce royal law. Military service became both a duty and a source of prestige for nobles, further intertwining martial prowess with political influence and social hierarchy. The Stuart dynasty also navigated the complexities of international politics. Marriages, alliances, and treaties connected Scotland to France through the Auld Alliance, counterbalancing English influence and providing military and economic support. These diplomatic strategies were crucial in preserving Scottish independence, particularly during periods of English aggression. Scottish monarchs had to exercise astute judgment, balancing domestic priorities with the demands and opportunities of European diplomacy, while ensuring the kingdom's survival in a turbulent geopolitical landscape. By the late 16th century, Scotland had emerged as a kingdom with a distinct identity, shaped by centuries of consolidation, cultural development, religious reform, and diplomatic maneuvering. The Stuart monarchs had strengthened central authority, navigated factional nobility, and engaged with broader European politics, leaving a legacy of resilience, adaptability, and enduring national cohesion. Yet the period also foreshadowed future challenges. Dynastic claims to the English throne, religious divisions, and ongoing border tensions would continue to shape Scottish history well into the 17th century. In essence, the Stuart dynasty and late medieval Scotland illustrate the intricate interplay of monarchy, nobility, religion, culture, and military organization. From Robert II's ascension in 1371 to the death of James VI in 1603, Scotland was a kingdom constantly balancing internal cohesion and external threats, tradition and reform, autonomy and diplomacy. The legacies of this era, strengthened monarchy, cultural flourishing, religious transformation, and political sophistication, would resonate far beyond the late medieval period, influencing the trajectory of Scotland as it entered the early modern era and laid the foundations for future unions, conflicts, and national developments. The year 1603 marked a pivotal turning point in Scottish history. The death of Elizabeth I of England and the subsequent accession of James VI of Scotland to the English throne, becoming James I of England. This dynastic union of the crowns created a personal union between Scotland and England, though the two kingdoms remained legally and politically separate entities. For Scotland, this was an era of both opportunity and profound challenge. The Scottish crown gained unprecedented influence in European politics, but the nation faced internal unrest, religious tension, and complex interactions with a more dominant southern neighbor. James VI sought to consolidate his dual monarchy by promoting political stability and central authority in both kingdoms. In Scotland, he faced a fractious nobility and deeply entrenched religious factions. The Scottish Kirk, strengthened by the Presbyterian settlement of 1560, resisted royal attempts to impose episcopal structures, insisting on autonomy from monarchical interference in church governance. This conflict between the crown and the Kirk became a defining feature of the early 17th century, illustrating the tension between royal authority and religious sovereignty. James, though committed to asserting his power, had to navigate these disputes carefully, balancing coercion and negotiation to prevent widespread revolt. Religious tensions were further complicated by external factors. Scotland's Protestant identity, primarily Presbyterian, contrasted with the Anglican establishment in England and the Catholic presence on the continent. European wars of religion, the Counter-Reformation, and shifting alliances placed Scotland in a precarious position. Scottish nobles often aligned with continental powers according to confessional lines, creating layers of political complexity. The crown had to maintain unity within Scotland while projecting influence abroad, requiring both diplomatic skill and strategic patience. Domestically, the early Stuart period witnessed political factionalism and rebellion. Nobles retained significant regional power, and alliances often shifted according to personal and dynastic interests. The early 17th century saw sporadic uprisings against royal authority, including resistance to taxation, attempts to limit the influence of the crown, and disputes over legal prerogatives. The Scottish government, while increasingly centralized, relied on negotiation, coercion, and judicial processes to maintain authority. This delicate balancing act highlighted the limits of monarchy in a kingdom where local loyalties and traditions remained strong. The 17th century was also an era of military and political upheaval, reflecting broader European turbulence. Scotland became enmeshed in the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, 1639 to 1651, a series of interconnected conflicts encompassing England, Scotland, and Ireland. Central to these wars was the struggle over religion and governance. Scottish Covenanters opposed attempts by Charles I to impose Anglican liturgy and episcopal authority, asserting the autonomy of the Kirk and the right of the people to resist tyranny. Scottish armies played decisive roles in key engagements, including the Bishops' Wars and battles during the English Civil War, demonstrating Scotland's capacity to influence the balance of power within the British Isles. These conflicts, while disruptive, fostered a stronger sense of national cohesion and political agency, as Scots negotiated, fought, and governed in a rapidly changing landscape. The Stuart monarchy, particularly under Charles I and Charles II, faced challenges in reconciling Scottish interests with English priorities. Charles I's insistence on religious conformity provoked widespread resistance, while Charles II navigated complex restoration politics following the interregnum and Cromwellian occupation. Scottish society experienced both devastation and adaptation during these turbulent decades. Economies were disrupted, towns and countryside were militarized, and social hierarchies were tested. Yet the period also witnessed intellectual and cultural resilience, as Scottish universities, clergy, and civic institutions continued to function, educate, and preserve cultural continuity despite political turmoil. Amid conflict, Scotland's intellectual and artistic life thrived in subtle but meaningful ways. The late 17th century laid the foundations for what would become the Scottish Enlightenment in the following century. Scottish thinkers engaged with philosophy, law, science, and economics, often drawing on continental networks. Institutions such as the University of Edinburgh and the University of Glasgow provided centers for scholarship and innovation, contributing to the kingdom's growing reputation as a hub of learning. This intellectual vitality allowed Scotland to navigate political crises with strategic foresight and cultivate a distinct cultural identity despite the dominance of England in broader political affairs. Economically, Scotland faced both challenge and transformation. Trade expanded with continental Europe, particularly through the Low Countries and the Baltic, even as domestic industries were disrupted by war. Burghs and ports became crucial nodes for commerce, while the crown and local authorities sought to regulate trade, taxation, and resource allocation. Economic hardship persisted in rural areas, and recurrent famine and disease underscored the fragility of subsistence economies. Yet urban centers developed craft industries, commerce, and early banking, laying the groundwork for later economic expansion. Scotland's relationship with England evolved gradually during this period. While the crowns were united, separate legal systems, parliaments, and institutions persisted. Scottish identity was reinforced through these legal and administrative distinctions, alongside cultural, linguistic, and religious particularities. The maintenance of distinct Scottish governance, even under a shared monarchy, ensured that the kingdom retained a degree of autonomy and resilience in the face of external pressures. This duality, shared monarchy but distinct identity, would remain central to Scotland's political landscape leading up to the Acts of Union in 1707. By the end of the 17th century, Scotland had endured decades of civil war, religious upheaval, dynastic intrigue, and economic challenge. Yet the kingdom had also demonstrated remarkable adaptability. Intellectual life flourished, cultural identity persisted, and political institutions evolved to manage complex internal and external pressures. The period set the stage for the eventual union with England, ensuring that Scotland entered the early modern era with a cohesive national identity, robust intellectual foundations, and a deeply ingrained sense of sovereignty. In sum, the union of the crowns was both a milestone and a challenge. The 17th century demanded that Scots navigate a turbulent world, resisting external domination, asserting religious autonomy, consolidating monarchy, and fostering cultural and intellectual resilience. By 1707, Scotland would emerge from these trials as a nation capable of integrating with England politically while preserving its distinct identity, a testament to centuries of adaptation, resistance, and strategic governance. The dawn of the 18th century heralded a decisive transformation in Scottish history. In 1707, the Acts of Union formally united the Kingdom of Scotland and the Kingdom of England into the Kingdom of Great Britain, creating a single political entity under one parliament at Westminster. The union was the culmination of decades of political negotiation, economic pressure, and dynastic concerns. For Scotland, the union brought both profound opportunity and deep controversy, reshaping governance, economy, culture, and national identity in ways that would resonate for centuries. The path to union was neither inevitable nor universally welcomed. Many Scots opposed the dissolution of the Scottish Parliament and the perceived erosion of sovereignty. Riots erupted in towns such as Edinburgh and Glasgow, and pamphlets circulated denouncing the Union as a betrayal of Scottish independence. Yet proponents argued that the Union would secure economic stability, access to colonial trade networks, and political influence within a broader British Empire. For a kingdom recovering from the financial consequences of wars, failed investments, and repeated Jacobite risings, the promise of integration with England's wealth and security was persuasive, though deeply contested. Economically, the Union had transformative effects. Scottish merchants gained access to the English colonies in the Americas, India, and the Caribbean, opening new markets for goods such as linen, whiskey, and agricultural products. Trade expansion fueled urban growth, particularly in Edinburgh, Glasgow, and Aberdeen, while new financial institutions and banking systems emerged to support commerce and investment. The Union also accelerated Scotland's participation in the Industrial Revolution, with textile manufacturing, shipbuilding, and coal mining becoming pillars of the economy. Cities transformed into industrial hubs, creating wealth and opportunities, but also new social tensions and urban challenges. Politically, the Acts of Union centralized governance in London, reducing Scottish parliamentary autonomy. However, Scotland retained distinct legal, religious, and educational institutions, preserving key aspects of its identity. The Scottish legal system, rooted in Roman law and customary practice, continued to operate independently, while the Presbyterian Kirk maintained spiritual authority and moral oversight over Scottish society. Education remained a Scottish priority. Universities such as Edinburgh, Glasgow, St. Andrews, and Aberdeen flourished, producing thinkers who would become central to the intellectual movements of the 18th century. Cultural development thrived alongside economic and political transformation. Scotland produced an array of influential figures whose ideas would ripple across Europe and beyond. Philosophers such as David Hume examined human nature, reason, and society. Economists like Adam Smith laid the foundations of modern capitalism with The Wealth of Nations, and writers and poets contributed to a distinct Scottish literary tradition. The interplay of Scottish intellectual vigor with access to broader British and European networks allowed ideas to circulate widely, enhancing Scotland's reputation as a center of thought, culture, and innovation. The Union also had social and political repercussions. Traditional elites, particularly landowning nobility and merchants, adapted to new opportunities and influence within the British state. Jacobite sentiment, however, persisted among segments of the population, particularly in the Highlands, where loyalty to the Stuart line fueled uprisings in 1715 and 1745. The Jacobite risings were attempts to restore a Stuart monarchy and resist the centralized authority of Westminster. Led by figures such as Charles Edward Stuart, Bonnie Prince Charlie, these uprisings blended romanticized notions of loyalty, clan allegiance, and resistance to perceived English domination. Though ultimately unsuccessful, the risings left a lasting imprint on Scottish culture, inspiring songs, folklore, and enduring narratives of rebellion and identity. The defeat of the Jacobites, most decisively at the Battle of Culloden in 1746, marked a turning point in Scottish history. The British government imposed measures to dismantle the clan system, restrict Highland culture, and consolidate control over the region. The disarming of clans, the banning of tartans, and the suppression of Gaelic language education aimed to integrate the Highlands into a more centralized state. These policies had profound cultural and social consequences, eroding traditional structures while accelerating the integration of Scotland into the British political and economic framework. Scotland's role in the British Empire expanded dramatically during the 18th century. Scots participated actively in trade, colonial administration, and military service. Merchants and entrepreneurs exploited global networks, investing in the Americas, Africa, and Asia. Scottish soldiers served in British regiments worldwide, while administrators and missionaries spread British influence overseas. This engagement with empire created wealth, expanded opportunity, and also exposed Scotland to new ideas, technologies, and cultural exchange, further transforming society. Urbanization and industrialization accelerated in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Glasgow became a hub for shipbuilding and trade with the Americas, while Edinburgh emerged as a center of learning, culture, and the arts. Infrastructure improvements, roads, canals, and bridges facilitated the movement of goods and people, linking urban centers with rural regions. Scotland's economy became increasingly diversified, moving beyond subsistence agriculture to embrace commerce, manufacturing, and financial enterprise. Yet industrial growth also brought social challenges, including overcrowding, labor unrest, and stark inequalities between urban and rural populations. Despite these transformations, Scottish identity persisted robustly. Language, religion, cultural traditions, and historical memory reinforced a sense of distinctiveness even within the framework of the British state. Enlightenment thinkers, writers, and artists celebrated Scottish heritage while contributing to global intellectual currents. National narratives of resistance, resilience, and ingenuity, rooted in centuries of independent governance and cultural evolution, continued to shape how Scots understood themselves in an era of union and empire. By the end of the 18th century, Scotland had undergone a profound metamorphosis. The Acts of Union had brought political integration and economic opportunity, while the Industrial Revolution, intellectual flourishing, and global engagement reshaped society, culture, and identity. At the same time, Scotland retained a distinct legal, religious, and educational framework, preserving continuity amid change. Social and cultural transformations, coupled with the legacies of Jacobite resistance, reinforced a narrative of resilience and adaptation that would define Scotland's trajectory in the modern era. In essence, the period from 1707 to the 19th century illustrates Scotland's capacity to navigate profound structural changes while maintaining a distinct identity. The Union, far from erasing Scottish culture or autonomy, catalyzed economic expansion, intellectual development, and global engagement. The kingdom adapted to centralized governance, leveraged new opportunities within the British Empire, and cultivated enduring cultural and intellectual traditions. Scotland emerged from these transformative centuries not as a subservient region, but as a nation with a robust economy, a rich cultural legacy, and an enduring sense of identity that would continue to shape its history into the 20th century and beyond. The 20th century brought Scotland into an era of profound transformation, marked by industrial decline, global conflict, social change, and a renewed quest for political autonomy. As the century began, Scotland was an industrial powerhouse. Glasgow, Edinburgh, Dundee, and Aberdeen were centers of shipbuilding, textile production, coal mining, and heavy industry. Scottish expertise and labor powered much of the British Empire's infrastructure, while the country's cities teemed with working-class communities, intellectual ferment, and cultural activity. Yet the global economic and political upheavals of the 20th century would challenge the stability and prosperity that Scots had long relied upon. Scotland's involvement in World War I, 1914 to 1918, was profound. Approximately 700,000 Scots served in the British Armed Forces, a significant proportion of the population. Scottish regiments earned reputations for bravery and resilience in battles such as the Somme and Arras. The war brought both heroism and tragedy. Tens of thousands of Scottish soldiers perished, leaving communities devastated and families bereaved. The experience of industrialized warfare, combined with the loss of a generation of young men, profoundly affected the social fabric, prompting shifts in labor, gender roles, and political consciousness. Memorials and remembrance practices, deeply embedded in Scottish culture, continue to honor these sacrifices. The interwar period presented further challenges. Industrial decline, particularly in coal mining, shipbuilding, and heavy manufacturing, undermined traditional economic bases. Unemployment and social hardship were widespread, fueling labor unrest and political mobilization. Scotland became a center of socialist and labor movements, advocating for workers' rights, public welfare, and greater political representation. The Red Clydeside movement in Glasgow exemplified this radical activism, highlighting the intersection of urban poverty, industrial decline, and the desire for social justice. World War II, 1939 to 1945, once again drew Scotland into global conflict. Scottish cities and shipyards were crucial to the British war effort, producing naval vessels, aircraft, and munitions. Scottish soldiers, sailors, and airmen participated in campaigns from Dunkirk to Normandy, and Scotland's ports played critical roles in logistics and convoys across the Atlantic. The war accelerated social change. Women entered industrial and military roles. Urban centers experienced aerial bombing, and the population witnessed the centrality of state coordination in national survival. Post-war, Scotland faced the dual challenge of reconstruction and adapting to the decline of its traditional industrial base. The post-war period saw both economic hardship and political evolution. Deindustrialization led to job losses in mining, shipbuilding, and heavy manufacturing, reshaping communities and prompting internal migration. At the same time, Scotland began to modernize its economy, with growth in service sectors, finance, higher education, and technology. Urban redevelopment transformed cities like Glasgow and Edinburgh, while rural areas faced depopulation and changing agricultural practices. Amid these shifts, Scottish identity and political consciousness remained resilient, increasingly expressed through calls for autonomy and self-governance. The latter half of the 20th century witnessed the rise of the devolution movement. Political parties such as the Scottish National Party, SNP, gained support by advocating for greater self-rule, emphasizing the distinctiveness of Scottish culture, law, and political priorities. The discovery of North Sea oil in the 1970s further strengthened arguments for economic autonomy, highlighting Scotland's potential resources and strategic significance. These developments culminated in the 1997 referendum, which led to the establishment of the Scottish Parliament in 1999, restoring a degree of legislative autonomy after nearly 3 centuries of union under Westminster. Devolution marked a milestone in Scotland's ongoing negotiation between integration within the United Kingdom and the desire for self-determination. The early 21st century continued to test and define Scottish political identity. The 2014 independence referendum represented a watershed moment. 45% of voters supported independence, demonstrating the enduring strength of nationalist sentiment even within the framework of the United Kingdom. The referendum, though resulting in a no vote, ignited debates about sovereignty, governance, and Scotland's role in global and European affairs. Subsequent political developments, including discussions surrounding Brexit, further complicated Scotland's position, particularly given the majority Scottish vote to remain in the European Union. Scotland emerged as a nation actively negotiating its relationship with both the UK and the wider world, balancing historical ties with aspirations for autonomy. Cultural life in 20th and 21st century Scotland flourished alongside political evolution. Literature, music, theater, and visual arts reflected both historical continuity and modern innovation. Scottish writers such as Hugh MacDiarmid, Alastair Gray, and Irvine Welsh explored themes of identity, social change, and urban experience, while musicians and artists drew on traditional folk culture and global influences to create distinctive expressions of Scottish creativity. Festivals, Gaelic revival efforts, and promotion of the Scots language reinforced cultural pride, linking contemporary Scotland to its deep historical roots. Social and educational reform also shaped modern Scotland. Compulsory education, expansion of universities, and investment in public health created more equitable opportunities, fostering literacy, professional expertise, and civic engagement. The welfare state, introduced after World War II, addressed poverty, healthcare, and social security, significantly improving living standards while reinforcing the role of government in societal well-being. These developments reflected a commitment to both collective responsibility and the cultivation of Scottish social identity within a broader national and international context. Internationally, Scotland has maintained a significant presence. Scots have contributed to diplomacy, science, commerce, and culture worldwide. Diaspora communities in Canada, the United States, Australia, and beyond continue to shape perceptions of Scottish identity globally, linking historical memory with contemporary influence. Scotland's universities, research institutions, and creative industries further project its intellectual and cultural footprint internationally, while participation in global governance and trade reflects an engaged, outward-looking nation. Throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, Scotland has balanced heritage and modernity. Its historical experience from resisting Roman conquest to forging national identity through the medieval and early modern periods informs contemporary political debates, cultural expressions, and societal values. The establishment of devolved governance, participation in global networks, and ongoing discussions about independence illustrate Scotland's enduring negotiation between autonomy and integration, tradition and innovation. In conclusion, the story of modern Scotland is one of resilience, adaptation, and continuity. Industrial prowess, wartime sacrifice, cultural flourishing, and political evolution have shaped a nation capable of navigating both global and domestic challenges. From World War I trenches to 21st century parliamentary debates, from industrial decline to cultural renaissance, Scotland's trajectory reflects a deeply rooted identity that survives and adapts through centuries of change. The nation's capacity to balance historical legacy with modern aspirations ensures that the story of Scotland remains dynamic, compelling, and profoundly relevant in an interconnected world. The history of Scotland is a narrative of endurance, transformation, and identity, stretching from the Roman incursions of 79 CE to the contemporary debates of the 21st century. Across centuries, Scotland has been shaped by conquest, rebellion, dynastic ambition, intellectual brilliance, and the resilience of its people. Its legacy is not solely measured in political borders or military victories, but in the enduring cultural, social, and ideological threads that have defined the nation across millennia. From the earliest Roman campaigns under Gnaeus Julius Agricola, Scotland was defined by resistance and resilience. The tribes of Caledonia, the Caledonii, Tyaxili, and others resisted subjugation, leaving a legacy of defiance against external domination. Although Rome established forts and briefly asserted control in the southern and eastern regions, its inability to fully subdue the land north of the Fourth Clyde Line reinforced an early sense of Scottish distinctiveness. This period planted the seeds of territorial identity and martial tradition that would echo throughout Scotland's subsequent history. Following the Roman withdrawal in the early 3rd century, Scotland entered a period of fragmentation, with Picts, Gaels of Dalriada, and Britons of Strathclyde carving out regional kingdoms. These divisions, though politically fragmented, fostered diverse cultural and linguistic development. The arrival of Vikings in the late 8th century further shaped the landscape, influencing settlement patterns, trade networks, and political alliances. It was during this turbulent era that Scotland's emerging identity began to crystallize, a tapestry of clans, kingdoms, and maritime connections, resilient in the face of external threats yet adaptive to new influences. The unification of the Picts and Gaels under Kenneth MacAlpin in 843 CE marked the birth of a centralized Scottish monarchy. While the historical details are partially mythologized, this unification provided the structural foundation for a kingdom capable of resisting invasion, administering law, and consolidating cultural identity. Subsequent medieval kings, particularly Malcolm II and David I, advanced central authority, founded burghs, and established ecclesiastical institutions, weaving law, culture, and faith into the fabric of Scottish nationhood. These efforts created enduring institutions and social structures that would define the kingdom's governance for centuries. The Wars of Independence in the late 13th and early 14th centuries crystallized Scottish national identity through struggle and sacrifice. Figures such as William Wallace and Robert the Bruce transformed resistance into a moral and political movement, asserting sovereignty against the most powerful military force of the era. The Declaration of Arbroath in 1320 articulated a radical principle: kings ruled by the consent of the governed, and Scotland's independence was inviolable. This document not only solidified the legitimacy of Robert the Bruce's reign, but also established the ideological foundation for Scottish self-determination, influencing governance, law, and national consciousness in centuries to follow. The Stuart dynasty, ruling from 1371 to 1603, navigated internal factionalism, external threats, and religious upheaval. Monarchs like James I strengthened royal authority while balancing the power of fractious nobles. The Scottish Reformation of 1560, championed by John Knox, redefined religious life and institutionalized Presbyterianism, embedding moral and political principles that would shape governance and societal norms. The dramatic life of Mary, Queen of Scots, intertwined dynastic intrigue with the evolving religious landscape, illustrating the complexities of leadership, faith, and loyalty. The late medieval period consolidated institutions, cultural traditions, and governance structures that reinforced Scotland's enduring identity. The Union of the Crowns in 1603, followed by the political and social challenges of the 17th century, tested Scotland's resilience. Civil wars, the Covenanter movement, and interactions with the Stuart monarchy highlighted the kingdom's ability to assert religious and political principles even amid personal union with England. Intellectual and cultural achievements persisted during these turbulent times, laying the groundwork for the Scottish Enlightenment, which would elevate Scottish thinkers such as David Hume and Adam Smith to global prominence. These centuries demonstrated Scotland's capacity to blend resilience with adaptation, preserving autonomy while engaging in European politics, culture, and trade. The Acts of Union in 1707 ushered in a new era, merging Scotland politically with England but preserving key legal, religious, and educational institutions. The subsequent transformation of Scottish society during the 18th and 19th centuries' industrialization, urbanization, participation in the British Empire, and the flowering of culture and intellectual life illustrates Scotland's adaptability. Despite economic challenges and political subordination, Scotland maintained a distinct identity, as evidenced by the continued use of Scots law, the prominence of the Kirk, and cultural traditions that endured through urban and industrial change. The Jacobite risings, particularly the rebellion of 1745 and the defeat at Culloden, left a profound imprint on Scottish memory. Highland culture was suppressed, yet these events became central to the narrative of resilience, romanticized heroism, and regional identity. The integration of Scotland into the British state did not erase national consciousness. Instead, it fostered reflection on sovereignty, autonomy, and cultural preservation, reinforcing the enduring significance of Scotland's history and legacy. The 20th century brought unprecedented challenges and opportunities. Industrial decline reshaped traditional labor and urban centers, while both world wars demanded sacrifice and highlighted Scotland's strategic and cultural significance. The post-war period saw social reform, education expansion, and urban redevelopment, balancing modernization with preservation of heritage. Political evolution, particularly devolution in 1999 and the 2014 independence referendum, reflected centuries-long themes: the desire for self-determination, negotiation of identity within larger political frameworks, and the persistent assertion of Scottish autonomy. Modern debates about sovereignty, governance, and national identity resonate with historical struggles for political and cultural recognition, linking contemporary Scotland to its millennia-old narrative. Cultural achievements throughout history remain central to Scotland's legacy. Literature, music, philosophy, and scientific innovation have consistently projected Scottish influence beyond its borders. Figures from the Enlightenment, as well as modern writers, thinkers, and artists, demonstrate that Scotland's contribution to human knowledge, governance, and culture is disproportionate to its geographic size. The interplay between historical experience and cultural production reinforces the notion of Scotland as a nation shaped by resilience, intellectual rigor, and creativity. Ultimately, Scotland's history is defined by its capacity to endure, adapt, and assert identity. From resisting Roman occupation to consolidating medieval kingdoms, defending independence against England, navigating dynastic and religious upheaval, and transforming through union and industrialization, Scotland demonstrates the complex interplay of resilience, innovation, and cultural continuity. Its legacy is evident not only in institutions, laws, and governance, but also in enduring cultural memory, national consciousness, and global influence. The Scottish Empire may not have spanned continents like other European powers, yet its intellectual, cultural, and political impact has been profound. The moral and legal principles articulated in the Declaration of Arbroath, the innovative thought of enlightenment, figures the courage of warriors defending their homeland, and the adaptability of Scottish society through centuries of change collectively form a legacy that continues to resonate. Scotland's history offers lessons in endurance, identity, and the negotiation of power, a testament to a nation whose influence transcends its geographic boundaries. In reflecting upon Scotland's journey, it becomes clear that its story is not merely a sequence of events, but a continuum of human endeavor, shaped by conflict, creativity, governance, and cultural memory. Every generation, from Roman-era tribes to modern policymakers, has contributed to a narrative of resilience and identity. The legacy of Scotland is a reminder that national character is forged not solely in triumph, but through the persistent struggle to define, protect, and sustain autonomy, culture, and collective memory. This enduring spirit ensures that Scotland's past continues to inform its present and future, offering a narrative that is at once deeply local and profoundly global. The story of Scotland is far from complete. Its history stretches across nearly 2 millennia, from the earliest clashes with Roman legions in 79 CE to contemporary debates about autonomy, governance, and national identity. This land of misty highlands, deep lochs, and rugged coastlines has witnessed relentless cycles of conquest and resistance, unity and fragmentation, innovation and survival. Each era, Roman incursions, medieval consolidation, wars of independence, dynastic intrigue, union, rebellion, industrialization, and modern political evolution contribute to the enduring narrative of a nation defined by resilience and creativity. From the first footprints of Gnaeus Julius Agricola's legions to the fortifications along the Antonine Wall, Scotland was recognized early on as a land difficult to subdue. Roman accounts, particularly Tacitus's Agricola, depict tribes of extraordinary tenacity, whose defiance shaped not only military strategies, but also the perception of Scotland as a land where autonomy and identity were fiercely defended. These formative centuries created a legacy of resilience that would echo through the subsequent Pictish, Gaelic, and Strathclyde kingdoms. Scotland's early inhabitants were not merely passive subjects of history. They were active agents, shaping landscapes, political alliances, and cultural identity in ways that left an indelible mark on the nation's memory. The formation of a centralized Scottish monarchy under Kenneth MacAlpin in 843 CE, combining Pictish and Gaelic territories, symbolized the emergence of a political entity capable of enduring external pressures while nurturing internal cohesion. The medieval kings who followed from Malcolm II to David I strengthened governance, codified law, founded burghs, and cultivated religious institutions, weaving the strands of culture, law, and faith into a coherent national framework. These efforts laid the foundation for a distinctly Scottish identity, one resilient enough to face the formidable English adversaries that would test its sovereignty in the centuries to come. The Wars of Independence in the late 13th and early 14th centuries elevated Scotland's narrative to legend. Figures such as William Wallace and Robert the Bruce transformed resistance into a national myth, asserting that sovereignty was not merely a matter of dynastic entitlement, but of collective will. The Declaration of Arbroath in 1320 articulated principles of governance, loyalty, and national identity that resonate even today. Kings serve their people, and a nation's freedom is sacred. Scotland's endurance in this period demonstrates how courage, strategy, and the articulation of ideals can shape a lasting national consciousness, inspiring future generations and influencing broader concepts of sovereignty and self-determination. The Stuart dynasty, reigning from the 14th to the early 17th century, navigated both internal factionalism and external pressure with varying success. Mary, Queen of Scots, epitomized the intersection of political ambition, religious tension, and personal tragedy, while the Reformation of 1560 under John Knox transformed the spiritual and institutional fabric of the nation. Scotland's religious identity, anchored in Presbyterianism, became a defining pillar, shaping law, governance, and societal norms. The interplay of monarchy, nobility, and clergy reflected a nation negotiating authority, faith, and identity in a volatile European context. The union of the crowns in 1603, followed by the political turmoil of the 17th century, tested Scotland's resilience in new ways. Civil wars, the Covenanter movement, and ongoing religious and political conflicts demanded adaptability and pragmatism. Yet, even amid upheaval, Scottish intellectual and cultural life flourished, laying the foundations for the Scottish Enlightenment. Thinkers such as David Hume and Adam Smith demonstrated that intellectual innovation could emerge from a nation navigating both internal challenges and external influence, proving that Scotland's legacy was as much philosophical and cultural as it was martial or political. The Acts of Union in 1707 further transformed the Scottish experience. Integration into the British state brought both opportunity and tension. Scottish merchants gained access to global trade networks, urban centers industrialized, and participation in the empire expanded their influence. Simultaneously, Jacobite risings and the suppression of Highland culture revealed the costs of political consolidation and the resilience of national identity even amid subjugation. Scotland's ability to maintain distinct legal, religious, and cultural frameworks during this period underscores the enduring strength of national institutions and cultural memory. The industrial and social transformations of the 18th and 19th centuries reshaped Scotland, creating urban centers, industrial economies, and a complex social fabric. Edinburgh and Glasgow emerged as hubs of commerce, learning, and culture, while rural areas adapted to agricultural changes and population shifts. Scotland's participation in the British Empire extended its influence across the globe, yet these developments never erased the sense of Scottish distinctiveness. The interplay between local traditions and global engagement illustrates a recurring theme in Scotland's history: adaptation without surrendering identity. The 20th century brought unprecedented challenges, from the devastation of World War I, where hundreds of thousands of Scots served and sacrificed, to industrial decline and urban transformation in the interwar and post-war periods. Scotland's contribution to World War II further highlighted its strategic and human importance within the British state. Social reforms, education expansion, and urban redevelopment improved living standards, while political movements, notably the SNP and devolution initiatives, revived debates about autonomy, governance, and national identity. The 1999 establishment of the Scottish Parliament and the 2014 independence referendum demonstrate that the question of Scotland's political destiny remains dynamic, evolving from centuries of negotiation, conflict, and self-definition. Culturally, Scotland has consistently projected influence beyond its geographic borders. Literature, music, art, and scholarship reflect both a deep connection to history and an openness to innovation. Festivals, the preservation of the Gaelic and Scots languages, and ongoing intellectual contributions reinforce cultural pride, linking past achievements to contemporary creativity. Scotland's diaspora extends these cultural and intellectual threads globally, ensuring that the nation's influence transcends its physical boundaries. At its core, Scotland's history demonstrates a persistent negotiation between identity, resilience, and adaptation. From resisting external conquest to forging internal cohesion, from asserting sovereignty to navigating union, Scotland has consistently maintained a distinctive voice. Its institutions, from the Kirk to universities and legal frameworks, have preserved continuity amid change, while its people have consistently embodied courage, innovation, and perseverance. The legacy of Scotland is therefore multidimensional. Militarily, it is a story of resistance and tactical ingenuity. Politically, it is a tale of negotiation, sovereignty, and adaptation. Culturally, it is a chronicle of intellectual innovation, literary achievement, and artistic expression. The Scottish Empire, while not vast in territorial reach compared to global empires, achieved influence through ideas, culture, governance, and diaspora networks. Its narrative demonstrates that power can be measured not only in conquest, but in resilience, cultural contribution, and enduring identity. As we reflect on this history, one can see that the Scottish story is not static. The same landscapes that witnessed Roman campaigns, medieval battles, and Jacobite risings now host debates about governance, autonomy, and identity in the modern world. Rivers that once guided warriors and merchants now carry ideas, commerce, and cultural exchange. Highlands, cities, and lochs are living witnesses to centuries of adaptation, struggle, and achievement. The engagement of contemporary Scotland politically, socially, and culturally continues this long historical arc. From parliamentary debates in Edinburgh to global Scottish networks, the country negotiates its place in an interconnected world while remaining deeply conscious of its past. Historical memory informs contemporary policy, identity, and cultural expression, ensuring that Scotland's heritage is not merely commemorated but actively shapes the present and future. Ultimately, the story of Scotland is a testament to the enduring power of resilience, identity, and adaptation. It illustrates how a relatively small nation can shape global intellectual, cultural, and political landscapes, how societies can endure conquest and transformation, and how national character is forged through centuries of negotiation between tradition and change. Scotland's history is a living narrative, reminding us that the past is never static. and that the present carries forward the struggles, triumphs, and wisdom of generations long gone. In this sense, the Scottish Empire endures not as a land of territorial conquest alone, but as a realm of ideas, identity, culture, and resilience, echoing across centuries, inspiring both its people and the world. Its legacy is a challenge and an invitation to understand, engage, and participate in a history that is as much about the future as it is about the past.